John Locke will be the focus for today, but I first wanted to touch up a little bit on Spinoza because I didn't mention that Spinoza was a mind-body dualist in the same way that Descartes was, with an interesting difference. For Spinoza, the mind and the body have no common pineal gland or any other kind of contact with one another. They're totally separate. Different modes of existence. So that usually leads some people like Antonio Damasio, who writes his book, his second book was Searching for Spinoza. Never finds him actually in the book. I don't know. It's just an interesting topic, I guess. But in any case, they're different modes of existence. So some people wonder how on earth Spinoza was thinking about this, because after all, I feel like raising my arm, whichever one, and I raise it, it seems like my mind and my body are connected, and so that there's somehow interaction between them. But for Spinoza, as he describes it, they're totally separate. They're two different modes of existence. The one doesn't have anything to do with the other. So it seems like I'm raising my arm as a response to my mind's desire to do that, or whatever, right? But as far as he's concerned, it's just dumb luck, or, well, not luck so much, but God, having been the creator of everything, and being everything. Remember Spinoza, pantheism, right? Everything is God. That everything is coordinated. So as my mind thinks I'm raising my arm, it just so happens that my body raises the arm. The body's completely mechanical, and the mind is completely spiritual, so there's no interaction. So he doesn't end up with the same kind of goofy problem that Descartes has, that, we talk about the ghost in the machine and stuff. How on earth, Descartes, could you imagine that, these two things are completely different and yet interact? Well, Spinoza said they're completely different and they don't interact. It just seems like they do because everything is parallel. So it's parallelism. How do we understand what Spinoza means? My interpretation of it, and this is me, there's no clear interpretation that everybody agrees with. My interpretation is that there are two different ways of talking about our experience. The one mode talks about everything as being physical, and the other mode talks about everything being spiritual somehow. So we have two different modes. And those are, for Spinoza, the only two modes that we're aware of, a mental or spiritual mode and a physical mode. But interestingly, since God is infinite, which is why, of course, God is everything, because if God wasn't everything, then there would be something that would limit God. And God, by definition, is that in which nothing greater can be thought. So that scholastic definition that the monks used, which was, of course, fascinating, still is, right, leads logically, Spinoza argues, to the argument that you don't have anything else except God. Because anything else besides God would be a limit to God. So God wouldn't be that in which nothing greater can be thought. Kind of intriguing, I think. But he also adds that God has an infinite number of attributes, while we being finite and only having we think of things having a material attribute and also having a spiritual attribute. God has way more attributes than that, just we're totally unaware of them. That actually seems to be pretty cool too, because from a contemporary point of view, especially since we've learned that we go in paradigm shifts, and then when you have a paradigm shift, there's a whole different way of looking at things that you hadn't had before, and that kind of opens up all kinds of possibilities that you didn't have before. That actually leads really to an agreement with Spinoza that whatever the universe is, if you want to call it God or not, it has lots of aspects that we're totally unaware of. And of course, for Spinoza at the time that he existed, we didn't know about different aspects of light. I remember learning, I had a parakeet, a lot of people have parakeets and parrots and things. You find out that birds have plumage that is ultraviolet, I think. They can see one another, and they get even emotional messages apparently from one another because of the way their plumage reflects ultraviolet light, which we don't even see. So there's all kinds of things that our senses don't tell us about the world, but that are out there once we discover means of discovering X-rays, all kinds of interesting things. So that's interesting. So Spinoza is still interesting and a puzzle, but he's also a guy that leads us to the next step, which is John Locke. John Locke is British and has lots of connections in England. He's influenced, of course, by Thomas Hobbes, who we'll see has a major impact on his political philosophy and on our philosophy. But he is also working with an earl. He becomes not only an educated person, but he also gets his medical degree, and so he ends up being the medical doctor for the earl that he works with, who is also considered a philosopher. Let me find his name. Robert Hooke, by the way, was the one who gives us microscopes, if you remember that. He's the one that coined the name cell, because he saw these cells in cork that reminded him of the cells of monks in monasteries. Tabula rasa, don't let me forget. There he is, the Earl of Shaftesbury. I don't know why I have trouble with that. And so he worked with the Earl of Shaftesbury, and that ended up becoming a political problem because of political, fighting in England at the time. Remember, there was fighting when Hobbes was alive, and Locke is still there. James had become king, and James was Christian, or Catholic rather, and as a result of that, there was conflict between the Parliament and James. Locke ended up leaving and going to the Netherlands in order to escape the conflict. He didn't want to be in trouble or go to jail. The Earl of Shaftesbury actually did end up in jail, I believe, because of the political conflicts. In any case, while Locke is in Amsterdam, and he's there working for William, who is a noble in the Netherlands, although the Netherlands doesn't have a monarchy. Instead, they have various types of councils and things. By the way, there's a neat book if you're interested in William, the Black Orchid, the Black Orchid. There's a film. I haven't seen the film, but the book, The Black Orchid, is kind of neat. William is the, that's not it. The one I'm thinking of is by Dumas. Maybe it's the Black Tulip, sorry. My flowers mixed up. Do that. And that only makes sense because tulips, of course, Netherlands tulips. Dr. Tulip, the anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulip. In any case, the Black Tulip, William is one of the main characters and very, he's keeps showing up. He's always wearing like a long coat, trench coat. He's kind of like a spy. That's interesting if you're into novels. Alexandre Dumas is the same one who wrote the Three Musketeers. Nobody reads that anymore, the Three Musketeers. And then the other one I remember was The Man in the Iron Mask, The Count of Monte Cristo. Yes? So those kinds of novels. But William shows up as a character in a novel. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, so he's in the Netherlands. And remember that Spinoza, holy Spinoza, was there and died just a little bit before Locke arrived. So they never met, and he never had a chance to, have discussions with him or anything. However, I don't know exactly how it came about. Locke was the one that ended up somehow getting a copy of Spinoza's Ethics. And I don't think it had even been published yet. So at that point, he was one of the early people to be influenced by Spinoza through reading Spinoza's Ethics, which we, of course, discussed last class. Curious how many of you thought, yes, his argument was persuasive. It does seem persuasive, yet it's absolutely infuriating because, no, that's not what we want to mean with the Christian tradition. In any case, what happens to Locke is that he's persuaded by this, if you want to call it this, it's a paradigm shift. And the idea that everybody is part of God and ought to be tolerated, at least tolerated. I mean, not necessarily made friends, with everyone, but you should at least accept that the idea of everything on the earth is sacred, and in that sense, including one another, and that we ought not to really go to war with one another over things like beliefs and stuff of that sort. For Spinoza, remember, he thought science would essentially do away with religion. So you wouldn't have all these conflicts between religions, which Europe was going through. I mean, they had lots of these wars, Protestants versus Catholics and so on. Plus, of course, there's the war against Islam and all that stuff. So this is an issue, that we can stop by just respecting everyone and realizing that everybody's faith is in a sense a scientific attempt to understand the best ways to live with one another and how to cooperate with nature and so on. It's just that now we've got an even better scientific way of living with one another and cooperating with nature, by using the scientific method. Thank you, Descartes and Galileo, right? So if we all start learning how to do science, all of these, various beliefs Spinoza thinks are just going to go away. But by the way, there's still plenty of folks today who still have that hope. I mean, one of the neatest ones relatively lately is Steven Pinker, Enlightenment Now. Sorry if I'm going to Amazon again, or she's not here to be upset about it. But Enlightenment Now, if we only, become educated, enlightened, basically go to college and get, courses that Steven Pinker teaches at Harvard, you end up no longer believing in these religions that cause us to blow one another up and all that kind of stuff. You know what? We're all in this together. We all ought to think about the whole. How can we make life better? Did you have something to say? No. I saw you going like, oh, I want to.
I'm just listening.
Okay, that's fun. This is neat stuff. Now, I mean, we also have plenty of smart people that point out that intellectuals who think that we could do without religion are just bonkers, right? Because what is religion, by the way? I'm going to cheat on this. I cheat on everything, actually. I go to my class notes and other items, and I go, what is religion? I have to make it smaller because it's actually a terrible web page. It's one of those that just keeps going beyond what you can see. But so I've tried to answer this. What is religion? And my argument is that the whole business of religion is belief in a meta-narrative or a big story that explains everything. The French are the ones that came up with the idea of so a narrative is a story, right? And of course we got stories that explain all kinds of things. By the way, today some might refer to us not so much as Homo sapiens or even Homo sapiens sapiens, but as Homo neurons, man the storyteller. The main way that we typically pass on knowledge, especially in traditional communities and so on, is through stories. And we tell stories, those stories get passed on, and those stories give us our sense of values, our idea of the roles that we play, the